The first raindrop slid down the bridge of my nose like a warning. The second came with needles. By the time my father's tail lights thinned to pinpricks, the sky had torn itself open and the gravel shoulder was a gulping mouth around my shoes. 35 miles isn't far, Clara. Strong women don't whine, Victor Wynn had said, his voice a summer picnic lightness that made the cruelty worse. He'd taken my phone for distraction, drained the battery himself, patted my pocket to confirm the black screen, and pocketed my wallet as if he were straightening a crooked picture frame. A lesson, he called it. Discipline, he believed, was love with the softness boiled out. I stood with my arms at my sides the way I learned to in childhood. Face still, body quiet, thoughts filed away out of reach. Inside my chest, the hurricane rattled the ribs of a birdcage. Victor's rules had always moved like goalposts. Speak up, you're disrespectful. Stay silent, you're ungrateful. Prayer at breakfast, performance at dinner, perfection in between. He preferred daughters who could serve hors d'oeuvres with one hand and hide their needs with the other. Our family looked righteous from the curb. White columns, clipped hedges, Christmas cards arranged by height and success. Our Clara, he'd brag to the neighbours, so composed, as if composure were a virtue and not a muzzle. Headlights drifted past in the rain-blurred distance, indifferent ghosts. Frogs heckled from the ditch like a bad audience. I stepped beneath a leaning billboard for a storage company, the cartoon key beaming dimples that the weather smeared into tears. Wind combed my hair off my neck and pressed the wet fabric to my skin. Somewhere behind those fields was a house I knew by heart, but that had never once known me back. I tried the old mantras, count to 10, count to 100, swallow, but numbers dissolved in the storm, bitter as aspirin on the tongue. He thought humiliation would sand me down to the shape he preferred, smaller, softer, grateful. What he didn't account for was the alchemy of distance. Pain, given room, grows edges. I let the night breathe around me. I pictured him already home and warm, pouring something amber, telling my mother that by morning I'd knock on the door chastened, that rain could cure an attitude better than a sermon. The quiet after cruelty is never quiet. It hisses. In that hiss, I heard his laugh when I'd once said softly, "No." He had tilted his head and corrected me. "You mean, yes." The black truck arrived without fanfare. A low hum, tires whispering on wet grit, a presence that felt like a hand offered palm up. The driver stepped out with the patient economy of a man who wastes nothing, not even posture. "Miss Wynn," he said, voice steady, not surprised, not pitying. "Ready." Elias Rowan had been hired last year after a donor's son mistook familiarity for entitlement at a gala and wouldn't take it back. Officially, he worked for the family. In practice, he watched over me the way someone guards a candle in a drafty room. He didn't reach for my elbow. He didn't scold. He simply opened the passenger door and created a doorway where there had been none. Heat rolled from the vents the moment the door latched, wrapping my bones in a plain, honest warmth that had never once required my obedience. Rain struck the windshield in white slashes, like tally marks counting down to something I couldn't yet name. We idled long enough for my shaking to settle, for the truck's cabin to become a small republic where my father's voice did not legislate. Elias kept his gaze forward, hands at 10 and 2, jaw cut from quiet stone. He understood something Victor never learned. Not every wound wants a question. Sometimes it only wants space to breathe. "Did he leave you here?" he asked eventually, as if he were offering me the dignity of authorship. I nodded once. Saying it would have made it theatrics. He accepted the nod as testimony and eased us onto the road. Water sheeted off the hood. The wipers beat a metronome. The tires stitched distance into the dark. My father believed in lessons. He believed pain could make truth obedient. As the storm lost volume and the heater exhaled steady, I understood the first clean thought of the night. He had enrolled in my class without knowing it. The syllabus would be brief. boundaries, absence, consequence, and the grading merciless only in its honesty. There would be no retakes. Elias signalled, merged, scanned the mirrors with the habitual caution of a man who has learned danger prefers the rear view. I pressed my palms toward the vent and watched the steam of my breath vanish into the truck's warm air. Behind us, somewhere in a house that photographed beautifully, a man poured a drink and called it leadership. Ahead, the highway ribbed out in wet black bands like the keys of a new instrument. When I finally spoke, my voice wasn't loud, it was real. I'm not going back. Elias didn't smile. He nodded once, a soldier's acknowledgement that orders had clarified. The truck gathered speed. The rain fell to a whisper, and the night opened like a door I chose for myself. The rain softened to mist by the time we reached the crossroads, the truck's wipers squeaking now and then like an afterthought. Streetlights flickered pale halos onto the asphalt, and the fog rolled across the ditches as if it wanted to erase the road altogether. Elias slowed, glancing at me only once, his eyes quick and sharp in the glow of the dashboard. "Do you want to go home?" he asked. The word home felt like a shard under my ribs. I pictured white columns that hid arguments, a dining room where silence was currency, and a man who measured respect in how quickly you bent. I turned my face toward the window, rain smears catching the reflection of my own hollow stare. "No," I whispered. The syllable was so small it barely existed, but it cracked open something in me that years of endurance had locked tight. Elias didn't ask again. He pressed the accelerator gently, as though he had been waiting for me to cut that cord myself. For the first time, the truck wasn't just moving, it was carrying me away. We rode in silence for a stretch, the road humming under the tires. My mind wandered to all the nights I'd overheard Victor preaching to his friends at the club, telling them how daughters were clay, how discipline built character. They'd nod, impressed by his certainty, sipping whiskey as though arrogance tasted noble when aged in oak. They never saw how clay cracked when baked under humiliation. They never saw the shards that cut from the inside. "Strong women don't whine," he'd always said. But what he meant was, strong women stay quiet, swallow insults, turn bruises into gratitude. I had mistaken that twisted scripture for survival for too long. Tonight, I realized silence could be sharpened into something else entirely. Elias finally broke the hush, his voice low, deliberate. "He's been sloppy lately." My head turned. He kept his eyes on the road. Victor's accounts, his donors, the contracts he waves around at charity dinners, not as airtight as he believes. There was no triumph in his tone, only fact. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But a seed lodged inside me. My father thought control was his birthright. If his reputation was cracked, the empire he built on discipline would crumble in the hands of truth. We pulled into a roadside diner, glowing red and half dead, the neon sign buzzing like a tired insect. Inside, the air smelled of coffee grounds and onions. Warmth, thick as a quilt. Elias gestured to a booth and slid in across from me, posture precise but unthreatening. When the waitress arrived, he ordered 2 coffees and a plate of fries, like a man who had eaten in hundreds of diners and never wasted a word. I wrapped my hands around the mug when it came, letting the heat soak through my chilled skin. He waited until I'd taken a sip before speaking again. "Food first, plans second." The phrase landed heavier than it should have. I realized no one in my family had ever considered my hunger before my usefulness. My father would have called this moment indulgence. To me, it was the first true choice of my night. I chewed a fry slowly, salt stinging my cracked lips, and let the idea expand. I didn't want to scream, didn't want to slam doors. Rage was his language, and I was finished speaking it. What I wanted was for Victor Wynn to feel what I had felt standing in the rain, that hollow, cold abandonment. I wanted him to learn that silence wasn't obedience, it was erasure. Across from me, Elias didn't press for details. He studied the steam rising from his coffee like patience itself. Outside, the storm thinned into drizzle, neon light reflecting off puddles like broken glass. Somewhere, Victor was spinning a story about tough love, probably laughing at my supposed tears. He didn't know that, while he was bragging, I was rewriting the syllabus of his life. The apartment Elias found for me was small, a one-bedroom with paint peeling in pale curls and a fridge that hummed like it had secrets to tell. But when I turned the key, my own key, and stepped inside, it felt like a palace. No portraits glaring down from the walls, no footsteps heavy with judgment, just 4 walls that didn't echo my father's voice. Elias carried in a single box, clothes, papers, a spare phone already charged. "It's not much," he said. I touched the chipped countertop, the crooked blinds, and whispered, "It's everything." By the second day, the calls began. Unknown numbers filled the screen. I let them ring out, each voicemail carving the same pattern. First the command, then the threat, finally the plea. "Clara, enough, come home, don't embarrass me like this. You'll regret it." His voice grew ragged, but not with worry, only with the panic of losing control. I saved every message, but answered none. Silence, once my cage, was now my blade. I started reaching out, carefully, to the people who mattered in his world. My aunt, who had stopped visiting years ago because dinners at our house always curdled into tension. An old teacher he bragged about donating to. Colleagues from the club, where he wore his discipline like a medal. To each, I told the story plainly. How Victor Wynn left his daughter 35 miles from home, in the rain without a phone or money, as punishment. How he called it a lesson. The line would go quiet. Not disbelief, just stunned recognition. They knew him. They had seen flashes of the same cruelty, disguised as principle. My words only stripped away the polish. The truth spread like water, finding cracks. Respect, once so solid, began to rot. I heard it in the pauses when they said his name, saw it in the way old family friends stopped posting smiling photos at his events. At night, I played his voicemails aloud for Elias. "She'll crawl back. She has to." Elias stood by the window, arms crossed, scanning the streetlights. "He's unraveling," he said. His calm unnerved me at first, but then I understood. He wasn't waiting for Victor's apology. He was watching the collapse, making sure it didn't take me down with it. The irony gnawed at me. My father always said silence was weakness, but silence was breaking him. He shouted into it, demanded answers from it, and it gave nothing back. It mirrored him until all he heard was his own cruelty. The lesson he wanted to brand into me was searing into his own skin. Still, guilt crept in like mold. I sat on the apartment floor one evening, phone buzzing with another voicemail, and thought of my mother. She was still in that house, smoothing napkins at the table, pretending not to hear storms inside her own walls. Would she defend him, as always, telling me to understand him better? Or would she sit quietly, staring at her plate, arranging green beans she never ate? I wanted to save her, but I knew she had chosen survival in silence long before I was born. Elias poured me tea, the kind of small act that felt enormous. "He thinks you're fragile," he said. "That's why he pushed. But fragility isn't what breaks. It's what cuts when the pieces scatter." I looked at him across the chipped table, steam curling between us. For the first time, I believed him. Outside, the city buzzed on, indifferent. Inside, I traced the rim of my mug and realized I wasn't waiting for Victor to change. I was waiting for him to learn, and he was learning the hardest way of all, through absence, through truth whispered into the ears of those he worshipped. 2 weeks later, I stood at the gates of the Wynn estate, the place that once felt like a fortress I could never escape. The paint on the columns looked duller, the manicured hedges unkempt, as if the house itself had absorbed the unravelling of its master. Elias waited in the truck at the curb, engine idling, giving me the space to decide if I wanted to cross that threshold one last time. I rang the bell, and for the first time in my life, the door did not open immediately. When Victor finally appeared, his presence had shrunk. Not his body. He still filled the doorway with broad shoulders and a commanding stance, but the force that once radiated from him was gone, hollowed. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed red, his voice a seesaw between anger and relief. "Clara," he said, gripping the doorframe like it was holding him up, "you've made your point. Come back. Let's put this nonsense behind us." I didn't step inside. The smell of polished wood and lemon cleaner drifted toward me, familiar and suffocating. I held his gaze, steady. "Forget that you left me 35 miles from home in the rain. Forget that you thought silence would break me." His mouth opened, but I didn't let him fill the air with another excuse. "It didn't break me, Father. It broke you." He flinched at the word father. Not dad, not papa, just the cold title he had always wielded like a badge. "You think people don't know?" I continued. "They know. I've told them. Your friends, your colleagues, the ones who nodded when you bragged about raising strong children. Now they know what strong meant to you. Humiliation, control, abandonment." His jaw clenched, but I saw the flicker of fear. Reputation was his god. I had just toppled the altar. I pulled a small key from my pocket, the spare he once handed me with a lecture about responsibility. I placed it on the doorstep, the metal clinking against the marble like a gavel striking. "This isn't my home anymore, and I'm not your lesson. You're mine." His lips parted, desperate for a defense, but nothing came. For the first time, Victor Wynn stood in silence, not as power, but as emptiness. I turned and walked back to the truck. My pulse thundered, but not with fear, with release. Elias opened the passenger door, his expression unreadable, but his nod firm as if to say, "It is done." Through the windshield, I saw Victor still clinging to the doorframe, swallowed by the very silence he once forced on me. I breathed in the crisp morning air, cleaner than any hymn, steadier than any sermon. Betrayal had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. He wanted obedience. I gave him truth. He wanted control. I gave him absence. And in that quiet, my freedom spoke louder than his voice ever had. As Elias drove us away, the estate shrank in the rear view. Just another house on just another road. My storm had ended. His was only beginning.